Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, here with Keith Myers. And this is a little interesting. We just got word a few minutes ago, actually, on some big news, big Seahawks news, after we recorded our other show that we were going to record. So that's completely banked. We've got a lot of material in that, but we needed to come back and record this little segment to share some news with you guys and to talk about it. Joining me with the news is Keith Myers, as usual. Hey, Keith.
Hey, welcome back.
What are we looking at here? We recorded an entire show of a lot of ranting, a lot of sharing of feelings and about one particular guy. And now this particular guy
is no longer part of the team.
No longer a concern.
So one of the things that we did, and I hope that those of you that are listening to this part, go ahead and listen to the other part, even if you the news, you've already heard the news, but
it's still relevant.
We laid out a pretty good case for why Brian Schottenheimer should no longer be with the Seahawks, and that they are not going to be able to win another title with him. And Pete Carroll apparently agrees, because Brian Schottenheimer is out as the offensive coordinator of Seattle. Fired today, this afternoon, within 5 minutes of us finishing up our show. They fired him, citing philosophical differences.
Yes. That was crazy. I mean, we finished recording. I pushed stop. I got the video compression stuff was working in the background. So I walked away, went to the kitchen, let the dogs outside, go to the bathroom, checked my phone, opened up Twitter, and literally the second post was Schefter saying that Pete Carroll and John Schneider had the lunch meeting. It didn't go well. And he was relieved of his job. I just couldn't believe it. And honestly, the more I think about it, I mean, this is really good news. I think just in kind of a quick reaction thing for the Seahawks, we kind of laid it all out in our show to follow this little segment, and you'll hear. But I think that we were going to be okay, but maybe okay just wasn't good enough, And I think the more that you and I talked in the show to follow, I kind of ended up leaning more towards your sentiment on that, that it was a detriment to Russell Wilson and to the team moving forward to having him still there. There were enough fatal flaws in his game, if you will, that made winning any more than we're currently on trajectory for, which is losing in the playoffs, not getting past the divisional rounds. That was our ceiling with him, I believe. And I think, who knows what's going to transpire after this, who Pete's going to bring in. But hopefully it marries up more, whether it's Pete's philosophy or whether a new coordinator gets complete autonomy. That remains to be seen. I imagine it's going to be the former, and we'll have to figure that out. But what are your initial thoughts?
I think you're going to see. When you talk about philosophical differences and all that, Pete was talking about yesterday about running more, maybe not more as in a lot more runs, but more effectively.
And part of the will.
Yeah, and doing so in order to dictate to the defense what they have to do, right? Forcing them, hey, you have to come up and respect the run, and by doing that, you're going to open things up for Wilson. And it, if that's the philosophy, then he's going to find a coordinator that's going to do that for him. And I don't have a problem with that, because like you said, he's not talking about running the ball a lot. He's talking about running it more effectively And so that way teams have to respect it. And I think that's what they need. I mean, you end up with this, the
What
running
does more
game.
effective mean to you?
Uh,
Does that mean a better offensive line and a premier running back, or does that mean we pick and choose different, more appropriate spots to run, or based on schemes that defenses are throwing at us and so forth?
I think it's more the second one than the first. It's more about, you know, lining up and with, playing a fullback at times, or the extra tight end, but and those kind of things. But it's more about being able to run when you want to run, and being able to run when you want to run, not only running when the defense is, in their dime, or that kind of thing. And when you do, it has to be effective. You've got to get, 4.5 yards per carry. You can't have, sure, we average 4.5 yards per carry, but that's because we have one, 20-yard run and then a whole bunch of 1-yard runs. You can't do that, right? It's got to be consistent, effective, where you can grind up some yards and some clock if you're going to run the ball. And there's not a lot of creativity in Seattle's running game. A lot of it is, inside handoff with Wilson in the shotgun, and they haven't done much outside of that since Shotty got here. And they need, honestly, they need a new set of eyes. They need someone who with some creativity to come in and fix a lot of the stuff that's going on.
Do you believe that Russell Wilson is in a position at all to affect this hire?
Yes. And I do, because of his relationship with Pete Carroll. Before this season and in the middle of this season, absolutely, because he was playing great. But the way he played down the stretch, and the way he looks a little bit broken right now, he's going to lose some of that. But him and Pete Carroll are tight. And if he comes in and says, I really want you to look at this person, or this type of scheme, or I'd like to play in, let's bring in, if Cliff Kingsbury gets fired, let's bring him in as an offensive coordinator, and, that kind of stuff. That might be something, that Pete Carroll will listen to.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, he did quote this. He said, I know the fans aren't real jacked up on hearing that, as in we want to dictate to the defenses. We want to run more effectively. But he said, but Russ knows it too. And I have a feeling those guys are probably more on the same page than we would even know. Yeah. So interesting. Wow. I mean, this is the most consequential hire of Pete Carroll's tenure, in my opinion, because
other than his GM.
Well, the fact that we were 12-4, the fact that Russell Wilson's 31 years old, 32, and he's got 4 or 5 more years on his contract, and Pete Carroll's signed up until 2025. This hire is going to determine if we can get past the divisional round into the NFC Championship game and put us in a position for a Super Bowl, because the window is open, but it's not going to be open forever, and we need to get it done. And this hire right here with DK Metcalf now, with probably a new running back in the fold, maybe a few new weapons. Philip Dorsett, they're talking about bringing back. This new coordinator is going to have a really nice situation with Russell Wilson at quarterback for the next foreseeable future. And so hopefully we can get the cream of the crop.
Hopefully. And that really, it comes down to it. And then, my biggest thing is, whoever it is, can they get the play to Russell Wilson in time so that he's not breaking the huddle with 8 seconds left and having to hurry to the line and snap the ball, and letting him get up there with time to read the defense, audible occasionally if he, decides he needs to. Increasingly under Schottenheimer, those plays were coming in later and later and later, to the point where Wilson didn't have time to audible when he needed to.
I agree. What about Pete Carroll's insertion occasionally on philosophical issues, and we talked about that, and play calling. Like once in a while, Pete will say, "Hey, I want to run this play." That's not unusual for coaches to do that, but how unusual is it for Pete Carroll to do that? And does a offensive coordinator need to be okay with that?
An offensive coordinator needs to be okay with that because Pete's not going to change. The key is if Pete Carroll trusts the offensive coordinator, he won't do it.
Yes, I agree.
He didn't
and
do
we talked
that.
about that later on in the show.
Yeah, Pete Carroll did not do that to Darrell Bevel, but the person who did was Tom Cable. So Tom Cable would come in, and basically he was in charge of the running game, and so he would dictate which runs that Bevel had to run, and it was a mess. But Pete Carroll didn't insert himself into that. With Schottenheimer, he does, and he has. It's not just that 4th and 1 in this game. This is something that happens, a couple times a game. Big call, he makes the call. He didn't let Schottenheimer make that call, and that's a problem.
So when Darrell Bevel was hired, he wasn't a big shot in the business. When Brian Schottenheimer was hired, it was almost a favor type of a hire. I mean, he had only been quarterbacks coach. The OC jobs that he had, he had floundered, right? This is an opportunity. You've got Russell Wilson as a MVP level kind of candidate. You've got Pete Carroll and that legacy. This team is not void of talent. So you're walking into a situation that is primo, and this is the opportunity that Pete has to get a premium quality offensive coordinator. Pretty much anybody that he wants that is available. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, is this an opportunity for the Seahawks really to knock it out of the park? And if they don't, what will be your reaction?
So, well,
I mean, what are your expectations on something like this?
I don't have expectations on something like this. And then I think that's part of the reason why I have a difficult time answering that question. Because to me, Pete Carroll likes to hire coaches that he sees, kind of a common like philosophy and that kind of stuff. I mean, he hired Schottenheimer because Schottenheimer was known for this, grind it, run it, power running, all that kind of stuff thing. And so that's why he went there, because that's what Pete wanted at the time. And I mean, we don't know what he's looking for, but we also don't know how much autonomy Pete wants to give up. Because if he wants to go get the next big, the next big get and get someone who's going to come in and really, shake things up on the offensive end and all of that, this is a great, as you were saying, this is a great gig if you're trying to attract someone, especially because you're looking at Pete Carroll and his age and the fact that there's already been mentioned that this may be his last contract. So you're looking at like 3 years and then a head coaching job opening him up. So if you're coming in as an offensive coordinator, you're like, I could, if I swing this, if we do a good job and we swing this, I might be the head coach in waiting,
Yes.
And so there are people that are going to be attracted to that and all of that. So there's a lot to like here, but is Pete Carroll willing to give someone the autonomy necessary to bring in that guy, or is he going to go find someone who he sees as a talent that maybe isn't well known, but that needs an opportunity? And
I think that it's going to be a combination. I think that you're going to get a guy that's progressive and has some great ideas and wants to bring in more of an updated, modern feel to the offense. At the same time, Pete's going to put some constraints on that to fit into his ball control, don't turn the ball over philosophy, which is it's a fundamental foundational pillar of a Pete Carroll team. So you're not going to change the pillars, but you could change the window dressing.
Yeah. And so what you end up with is a situation where this team, the offense is going to look a little different, and it needs to look different. Because it needs to take advantage of the talent that it's on the roster. And right now it's not using the talent on the roster in any way. So, but at the same time, it's also going to be a Seahawks team, right? It's going to be a Pete Carroll Seahawks team. It's going to be mean. It's going to be able to run the ball well, and just pound you on 3rd and 1 and get it, right? That's going to be a component. But Pete's not going to go out and hire someone who wants to throw the ball 80 times a game. He's going to hire someone who might be a big name, but also knows how to design
understands
a running play
of balance.
Yeah, and wants to be able to do that. So it's you can have both as long as the person, the candidate, has a belief about running the ball and wanting to make sure that is part of the game, so that way you can dictate to the defense what they have to do. I don't think it's going to be, you have to, that Pete Carroll has to have a certain amount of control, or, this person has to defer or whatnot. I don't think it's that. It's philosophically, do we line up? And if we do, then he's going to trust the person to do their job.
And I think that's the most important thing. And we talked about that later
yep.
on here. So I think that's good enough. Let's get this thing done. We're going to put this little segment in front of our other segment. We're going to leave that intact and put that out as well, just because there's a lot of good conversation in there, not only about Brian Schottenheimer, but other things, other issues, Pete Carroll stuff, Russell Wilson things. So we hope you enjoy that. I think this is good news overall for the franchise. It'll be very interesting the next few weeks on who the Seahawks end up bringing in. It really will guide the future for the offensive side of the ball for the near future, and we'll see what happens. But enjoy the show to follow, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Hey, Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, here with Keith Myers. We're going to talk postseason angst and a recap, and we're going to dive into all things good, bad, and ugly, and otherwise in this show. Keith, welcome. It's good to see you. I'm glad we're here to talk Seahawks football.
Good, bad, and ugly. I know there's a lot of bad and ugly. I'm trying to find the good.
Well, this is definitely going to be one of those cathartic type shows.
It will be.
We just kind of go through therapy together for the next hour and a half.
I gotta tell you, Bill and I are kind of known for the fact that we're pretty positive guys. We're definitely glass half full guys when it comes to the Seahawks. We aren't the doom and gloom type, but I gotta tell you, I am not feeling that today after this weekend's game and everything that happened and everything that went on and how just awful the team looked. I am not feeling the least bit positive about anything, and I'm sure it will come across. And if you're looking for me and my positiveness, you're going to be disappointed. So,
well, at least you're doing it with a smile on your face in the first minute and a quarter. So,
of course.
So, yeah, when we had a little text thread going on yesterday, we were just talking about it, and I just got the feeling that this was going to be one of those shows where it was going to be kind of a tough deal, but we'll get through it. Let's start with some good stuff though, right up front, just so we can kind of separate it from all the other stuff. Seahawks have agreed to a contract extension with John Schneider through the draft in 2027. So 5-year extension, which is great news for the franchise. I think he's done an outstanding job. I know there's some detractors out there. I'm not one of them. I think he's just been really amazing and a solid rock, a very consistent type of guy. He's been able to go out there and swing for the fences on some deals. Some of those have worked. Some of them have not worked. I think on balance, I think you want a guy like that out there taking a few chances now and again for your franchise and trying to put yourself in the best position to get quality players to get you over the hump. And he's done that. He's had a couple of back-to-back drafts, I think, that have been really well. Collier looks like it would probably work out, and maybe not that first round talent that we want, but a very steady presence there on defensive end. Blair, unlucky to get hurt, but looked like he has quite a bit of upside. Metcalf, obviously. Cody Barton's a great special teams gunner. Gary Jennings didn't work out, obviously. Haynes been injured. Amadi, though, Amadi's worked out pretty
Very
darn
well.
well. Burkirvin's good special teams guy this year. Brooks ended up being really decent draft pick. I think it's going to be very steady in the linebacker court for many years. Taylor,
I think you're underselling Brooks.
Yeah,
I think you're underselling him. He wasn't steady. He was great. Took him a bit to get into the lineup because they started out with Irvin and Brooks was hurt, and it took a bit. Once he got healthy and he came back, he was great. I think you're underselling him as a rookie without the normal mini camp, without the normal off season, and he battled an injury the first half of the season. He was still one of the better players on defense.
And I'll point out, outperformed Queen statistically.
A mile.
Yeah. And then Lewis at right guard. I mean, that's a great pick in the third round. Parkinson kind of started injured, never really got into it, but he had a couple of catches this year. Looked intriguing. Dallas got injured. Alton Robinson in fifth round. What? Fifth or sixth round? Was it
fifth round?
Fifth round.
It's a fifth round draft pick, and he played like a second or third round draft pick, which
nice.
Funny. He's a guy who has second, third round talent.
Yeah.
And
glad
they
they got it out of him. Yeah.
Yeah, and they got a lot out of him. I mean, he looks like he's going to be a fixture there.
I
in
have
the rotation.
To say that really points well to Clint Hurt, the defensive line coach, assistant coach, defensive line coach. Did a good job, especially after the adversity of the first 8 weeks of the season. My goodness, those guys were getting hammered, and then all of a sudden they just turned it around. Carlos Dunlap shows up. That's another move by Schneider, bringing in Carlos Dunlap and Jamal Adams. It's just, I think that he's been on balance one of the best GMs in the league since he's been with the Seahawks, and that points to the fact of all of our success combined with the coaching of Pete Carroll.
They had some rough drafts in there. 2014, 2015. There were some really rough ones, and then you're starting to wonder. You're like, okay, we know a lot of it was Pete knowing college talent as a college coach coming out, so he kind of had an insight there. And you're like, well, maybe that was the secret to those great drafts early on. But then the last couple of years have been very solid, very good drafts. And like this last one, he went into the draft with no draft capital whatsoever, and still got a number of key starting caliber contributors out of the draft. I mean, that was a fantastic job by Schneider. I have no complaints. I know people will nitpick about, Percy Harvin trade and Jimmy Graham and some of these other things that he's done. But that one, it limits or it ignores Pete Carroll's influence on those. And the other thing is, okay, they didn't work. So what? The team made a big play to try and make a big play and continued to win even though it didn't work out well. Okay.
Yeah. So locked in. The interesting part about it, and I think this was pointed out online a little bit, was the fact that it extends a couple of years past Pete Carroll's current contract, which runs through 2025, which would give some continuity to the franchise moving forward, possibly past Pete Carroll, because they're into another coaching regime.
I mean, obviously, Pete Carroll is capable of changing his mind and nothing working out, but there has been talk that this is his last contract and that he's going to retire at the end of it, play it through, and then retire afterward. And so this sets up the Seahawks to have John Schneider in place to pick Pete Carroll's successor. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. All right. So this was going to be kind of a season review show, and I guess there'll be a little bit of that. But I think that this is going to be kind of a critical look at some players, some coaches, the way that we played, the way that we started, the way that we finished. Obviously, the playoff loss, probably one of the worst losses in franchise history, one of the worst losses of Russell Wilson's career and Pete Carroll's tenure.
Certainly one of the worst performances of Russell Wilson's career.
Yeah, and when it comes in a game, in a wild card game, with you're playing against a quarterback that ultimately went out after 9 plays, and then a guy with 4 fingers come in and outplay you a little bit, you're going to get that. You're going to get that sentiment thrown your way. So let's just kind of open it up. Keith, why don't you kind of just set the tone of the discussion and just kind of get into it a little bit.
You know that's dangerous, right? Having me set the tone of the discussion.
I think it's warranted. I think you have a lot to say.
Brian Schottenheimer needs to be fired 3 days ago. He needed to not be a member of the Seahawks before the end of Sunday. And I'm not putting all the blame on him. You got to blame Russell Wilson. He played terribly. The offensive line didn't play well. I mean, there's lots of blame to go around
Russell
for what
Wilson
happened.
Didn't play well the last half of the year.
True.
And you can point some of that back to scheme.
Yeah,
but some of it
is him.
Right.
Some of it, and those things go hand in hand. I mean, you have
correct.
He isn't playing well because the scheme is awful, and the more they try and force him into making things work in a terrible scheme, it broke him, at least for this year. But look at what the Seahawks did this year against the Rams, the Dallas game last year.
The Packers game last year, the Dallas game the year before.
Packers game last year, Dallas the year before, and even when they beat Philly, which was like half a team because everybody was hurt. Schottenheimer has not put together a game plan in a playoff game that has worked. Period.
Look at the halftime deficits in those games.
Yeah.
I mean,
and they're there.
It's crazy.
They're there, and it's not like, well, oh, sure, the defense just gave up all these points and whatnot. No, the offense literally did nothing.
Right.
In those games.
And Pete's response usually in a press conference afterwards is, well, we were just trying to feel him out and call some plays that would set them up for later and so forth. But when you try to set somebody up for later, but you run few plays,
it better work when you set them up for later.
You run so few plays in those drives that you don't have a chance to really set them up and execute anything. Yeah. You never get to run those plays that you tried to set them up with.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
And so I look at this year, and people will point to that they scored more points than any team in franchise history. Scoring league wide was up 28% this year. They scored more points than any, basically hit a franchise record for points scored was true, I believe, for 20 out of 32 teams. It's not a significant number to me.
Well, they scored a ton of points, but they left a ton of points on the board. It could have been even more. They prioritized winning the turnover battle over actually scoring points. And I can point to some statistics I wrote down with regards to that. And I wrote down a couple quotes, and Pete said that Schotty helped adjust the offense later in the year to try to prevent turnovers. And that was one of their criteria for him electing to kind of keep Schotty around this year. And the offense in the first half, Russ had 8 interceptions. In the second half, he had 6 interceptions. So he prevented 2 turnovers by constraining the offense. However, in the first half of the season, he had 28 touchdown passes. In the second half, he had 14. So he took 14 touchdown opportunities away in favor of preventing 2 turnovers. Does that make sense at all?
Nope. I mean, no.
Why would you constrain something that has the potential to be so amazing while preventing just a few turnovers?
You got to realize that Pete Carroll is going to run interference for any guy of his that's under fire. So the fact that people are openly saying that Schottenheimer needs to be gone like, and not just me, but like the Seattle Times has run 2 articles essentially saying the same thing. He's going to defend him. And not everything Pete says when he defends players and coaches is truth.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the things that's going on here. I mean, what you have is a situation where they changed the scheme during the offseason. They came up with, they're going to let Russ cook, and they're going to let him throw the ball. And they had all this stuff out there. And then there was no preseason for anyone to get tape on what the Seahawks wanted to do. So they went out in the first few games and threw the ball over the field and dominated and put up all these points and were a record-setting offense for the first 5 games. And then teams started to adjust. And they figured out what Seattle was doing. Cover 4 instead of going to a cover 1 man under, and those kind of things. You stop. The reason why teams would always be in cover 1 man under is because it put everybody up near the line of scrimmage for those run plays. Because Seattle's known as a running team, so you want to do that. And once teams figured out Seattle wasn't going to run the ball, that they were trying to throw it, and then when they did throw it, they threw it deep. They put people back 2 deep. Safeties or cover 4 that quarters defense, right? So you have 4 players back, 2 corners and 2 safeties, and each of them have a quarter of the field as far as the zone, and you just cover those deep throws. And when those deep throws are covered like that, Seattle had nothing else. There was literally nothing else in their bag of tricks to roll with, and the offense ground to a halt. And the longer it went with 0 adjustments, not just in game, but in season, no adjustments whatsoever.
And those adjustments should have been to run the ball more, to bring the defensive backs up, or be able to use the middle of the field more for the short passing game, short, quick stuff.
I mean, and Pete Carroll even essentially came out and said it during his press conference that next year they want to get to where they can run the ball more and run the ball more effectively. And he says he doesn't want to run it 50 times a game.
He's not wrong in that statement.
He's not interested in. You
have to be careful.
Yeah, he's not interested in running and being run punt. A run pass punt they
had some nice splits this year, I thought.
They did.
But they did run the ball quite a bit less. I mean, they passed the ball close to what? 50? It was like
61%.
61%. Yeah. So, and some of the reason for that was because Chris Carson was injured a lot of the times.
Yep.
Carlos Hyde was injured all the time. Dallas got hurt halfway through the season.
Penny didn't come back to the last 4 games.
So and then once Carson was in games, they really had him metered. They would restrict him to 10, 12 carries a game. Carlos Hyde wasn't nearly as effective as Carson. Carson had his highest yards per carry average this year at 4.8. Last year it was 4.4, and he ran for 1,280 some odd yards. They didn't run the ball very much this year.
And so when Pete Carroll, the reason why he's saying he wants to run it more is because it forces teams to do what they did during the first 5 or 6 games. Play up closer to the line of scrimmage, commit to stopping the run play cover 1 in the back where you have 1 safety in the middle of the field and the whole sidelines
and
open.
It forces the defense to defend more than one thing.
Mm-hmm. And so, then you turn Russell Wilson loose. Because now he's got the defense and the weapons and everything.
Pete Carroll. Now, there's a lot of folks on Twitter right now just going, "Oh my God, we just got to get rid of this guy."
Well, because a lot of folks on Twitter deal in a binary world.
I agree.
And it's you either run on every down or you pass on every down, and there's nowhere in the middle. They live in a binary world, and I can't get behind that. You have to get if you're gonna take advantage of Wilson's greatest strength, which is his deep ball. Right, because he throws the best deep ball in the league, and maybe one of the best deep, or not even maybe one of the best deep balls of all time. But he throws those moon shots that are just perfect and all that.
Going to tight windows. Yeah.
If you're gonna do that, which you should, because that's, like I said, it's his greatest asset. You can't do that against cover 2 and quarters coverage. So you have to get teams out of it. And there's 2 different ways to get teams out of that. You either complete a lot of dink and dunk stuff and force them to come up and defend that, or you run the ball. And because of it's Pete Carroll, he wants to run the ball. The dink and dunk stuff also isn't a great part of Wilson's game. I mean, he's been so great for so long, we forget that he's, 5'11", 5'10" and 3/4 or whatever it was. And he has a harder time seeing that short middle of the field.
Which was really evident in this game, going back and watching the film and stuff. And the defensive line for the Rams got a lot of penetration most of the game. Lots of pressures, 5 sacks, 10 pressures on just 23 dropbacks. And so, yeah, that was tough to watch. I'm going to give you a few Pete Carroll quotes regarding this issue. Mm-hmm. He said he wants to, quote unquote, dictate more to defenses, and running more effectively is one of the ways to do that. I know that fans aren't real jacked on hearing that, but Russ knows it too. We need to be able to knock those guys into the scheme that we want to throw into. Right. So that's exactly what you're saying, is to get those guys to come up and give Russell Wilson the opportunity for the explosive plays, which we always talk about being important in winning football games. And
it's about dictating. It's about dictating to the other team what they have to do.
Yes, which we had gotten away from. We had the last 8 weeks to dictate terms to us.
Yeah, and so they decided they were going to keep people back. They were going to cover those deep balls. Made any adjustment. They never did anything else. They dropped Wilson back, had him stand in the pocket for an hour and a half and try and complete a 40-yard bomb to Metcalf, despite the fact that he was double or triple covered. And that doesn't make any sense, because they weren't dictating to the other team anymore. The other team was in the alignment that was necessary to stop what Seattle wanted. And so rather than taking what the defense gave them and doing a lot of dink and dunk stuff or running the ball, they continued to throw it into the coverage, and it was just dumb. Yeah. But what Pete wants to do is to dictate to the other team what they are going to do. You have to come up and stop Chris Carson, or he was going to kill you. And at some point they will. And when they do come up to stop Chris Carson, Wilson's going to hit you over the top, because now you're in a covered situation where you can't cover DK Metcalf because he's uncoverable unless you put 2 or 3 guys on him.
Right. Yeah. So, we're going to spend quite a bit of the offseason kind of diagnosing that and solving that. Like, what do we need to do scheme-wise to solve that? What do we need to do personnel-wise to solve that?
Here's the problem.
Some shows coming up.
Here's the problem with all of that. Unless Brian Schottenheimer is gone, you can't solve it. You won't solve it. You and I can talk about what the Seahawks should do all we want, and you know what'll happen? Nothing.
I don't agree.
Unless Brian Schottenheimer is gone. Unless Brian Schottenheimer is gone, it doesn't matter.
I think an underlying issue for me in this whole conversation with Brian Schottenheimer and Ken Norton Jr. for that matter, and Pete Carroll, is that Pete is involved too much into I guess I don't necessarily mind so much on the defensive side of the ball, because he's a natural fit back there, a defensive back coach, kind of calls the shots a little bit in the meetings and so forth. Lets Ken make the calls on the field during the games. But on the offense, it seems like there are 2 or 3, sometimes 4 instances a game where Pete's trying to insert himself into a certain situation at a critical moment in a game where he wants a certain play called. He'll override.
Fourth and 1 coming out of an injury,
right.
And they still can't get the playoff.
And he can't get the playoff. So for me, the trust issue, the trust level that Pete Carroll has in his coordinators tells me that they're not the right coordinators for the job. So for me, that's more important in wanting them to be released. Now I'm talking more about Brian Schottenheimer now than Ken Norton. Ken Norton's got some issues, and we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. We've got a coaches show coming up. For me, it's does he have the confidence and trust in them to be able to do their jobs independently so that Pete can focus on being Pete and the head coach and game management and clock management issues and stuff, which has always been an issue. And he hasn't hired a top level offensive coordinator for this offense since he's been here. And it's always been this relationship, this push-pull relationship where he wants it done his way. He wants it a certain identity, which is fine. You can have an overarching identity. He's the head coach. He gets that prerogative. But once you establish that identity, you need to enable your coaches to be able to do their jobs and without interference, because I think that causes its own set of issues and problems. And it may in fact be an underlying thing out there with Russell Wilson. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot going on there.
Well,
a lot of psychological stuff. Now I want to talk to you about Russell Wilson a little bit too, as we go on. And then as far as Ken Norton is concerned, I thought Ken Norton was going to be gone, for half the way through the year, and they put this thing back together. And I just realized, as the season went on, that it was just kind of a talent deficit thing in the deal, and a miscommunication situation going on. I think primarily with Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs. They were just not able to figure out what each was doing, and it made Quandre Diggs in the first half of the season hesitant. It made our defensive backs on the edge, our outside corners that rely on Diggs to be in certain spots at certain times, that they were playing off their man a little bit more because of the trust issues. And then they figured it out, and then Carlos Dunlap came on. So the combination of Carlos Dunlap, Adams figuring out his role, where he's, communication and stuff, really solved that. And you got to give both Pete and Ken some credit for coming through there. So I don't necessarily want his head on a platter. I think the defense is shown that it's on a trajectory that's rising. So I'm gonna leave that alone. But the thing with Shotty, and Pete's, reiterated his enough confidence in him to retain him for this year. He's come out and said he expects him back. So either he's going to get a head coaching opportunity somewhere else, or he's going to be back as the coordinator for the Seahawks next year. And
which means next year is a wasted year.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you, but I'm not going to be so pessimistic that I'm going to waste all my energy trying to be a defeatist in that situation.
Well, I'm just saying that what we've seen from Brian Schottenheimer in 4 years in Seattle and his time in LA and in New York as the coordinator there is that you will never win a Super Bowl with Brian Schottenheimer as your coordinator. He just isn't good enough at his job.
Yeah. Well, there's underlying trends, with Shotty and with Wilson that are concerning. The slow starts, not just in the playoffs, but every freaking game. It seems like we're slow starts. I mean, we scored first, a few different times during the season, primarily in the first 4 or 5 games, and then we didn't, and we were always playing catch up, and it's hard to do with our offense. We're not designed to do that. And then, and in playoff games, we've started from behind in 5 straight games at a halftime deficit. And you can't do that and expect to win in the playoffs and move forward and take that next step as a team. And we haven't. We've just proven that we haven't. We're still the same team that we lost to Dallas 3 years ago. And the lack of game and clock management, what's going on there?
Why are the plays coming in with 10 seconds left in the play clock?
Right. And the third down conversion rate at 40%, ranked 27th in the NFL. That's unacceptable with Russell Wilson as your quarterback. And that is a scheme situation. Now, Russell Wilson played awful a number of games late in the season, and obviously in the last game. But that third down conversion situation has been ongoing, not only this season, but last season as well. and they need to solve that. Like that needs to be a solvable situation where they need to gain yards on first down so that they're second and third and short more often and convert those. They should be, instead of 40%, they should be closer to 50%.
Yeah, and I mean,
and sacks. I just want to say one more thing. And sacks.
Yeah,
the
that's another
underlying
one.
trend of sacks. Now I know sacks is kind of a quarterback stat, quote unquote, but there were some offensive line issues as well, primarily at center and left guard. And I think those are probably kind of a priority situation. I agree with Pete, priority situation to address those things in the off season. And we'll talk about that as we go on too.
Yeah, and what you have is you have the situation where, yes, sacks are mostly a quarterback stat. I mean, it's not a one or the other as far as offensive line or quarterback, but more of the blame for most sacks lies on the quarterback than it does the offensive line. That's just league-wide. That's kind of the way it works. And Russell Wilson holds onto the ball a lot, takes a lot of sacks. It's part of him being Russell Wilson because of his ability and willingness to improvise when a play breaks down and make things happen. And he's so good at it. So, yeah, we don't worry about it. So what you end up with is a situation where part of the reason for hiring Schottenheimer was because of his ability to work with quarterbacks. Drew Brees loves him because he was a quarterback coach there. Same with Philip Rivers. So both those guys will go to bat for Brian Schottenheimer because he was their quarterback coach, and he's proven to be a good quarterbacks coach, or a great one. And we saw last year, not this season, but the previous season, significant improvement in Russell Wilson, his footwork, his pocket management, all these different things, because he was working with Schottenheimer. I mean, that's just part of it is. But then look at this season. If you bring in Schottenheimer and you're going to put up with all of the things that he's really not good at, which is most of his job, because he's going to fix your quarterback and keep your quarterback playing at a high level, then explain to me the last 8 games of Russell Wilson where he played terribly. I mean, these are the worst, probably the worst. This is the worst stretch of games for Wilson in his entire career, and probably his entire life.
I have a theory, and I hate to even speculate about it. I think that maybe Russell Wilson has some self-defeating tendencies and some when the whole MVP talk in the first 5 games was out of the ballpark. He was going to win it, no problem. He's going to get the first votes ever, and he's playing lights out, just playing tremendous ball, flawless. And for whatever reason, I think it's just too much. It's just too much, too much pressure, too much distraction. Defenses got to him in that Arizona game for the first time. And then Minnesota played him that way back to back. And then Buffalo happened. And I think it ruined him for this year. I don't think this is a permanent situation. I just think that he got into such a funk and didn't trust stuff, and the offensive line was letting him down more than not. And he started dancing around and started having bad fundamentals where he was dropping his head and looking down, and he was running up into sacks. And when he was spinning away, he would sometimes, before he would need to, he would just get panicked. And it's just, and on top of that, the coach, I'm sure in meetings privately, we didn't hear about it at the time, but constricted the offense on him, said, I can't have you turn the ball over. We're not going to let you throw those anymore. we're going to limit, those opportunities. And I think it was really disheartening for him. It would be for anybody. And all of it is just a lot to take, it's just on a human being level. And for me, I think that that's what it is. There's no physical issues that we've heard about. There's no concussion protocol that he's ever gone through. And so I just think that it's in between, in his head. And it's he's just going to have to figure it out. And maybe it's a new quarterback coach this year. Or, I know he likes to go and talk to different people all the time that are, therapy oriented and all that kind of stuff. And maybe he needs some of that. But I think that it just, certain things got to him this year that he just couldn't overcome. And, when we talked right before the show, we were going over some stuff regarding Schottenheimer and stuff. And I honestly believe, some of the reason why they didn't adjust and they didn't scheme out of what they were doing is they honestly believed that they thought that Russ was going to play out of it.
But it wasn't
it didn't happen.
The scheme problems weren't Russ.
No, that's what I'm saying.
You're asking Russ to throw the ball in basically where other teams are scheming away your routes and what you want to do, and you're asking him to play his way out of a funk by completing passes in that situation. No, you have to actually if you want to complete those passes.
They did not put him in the position to be successful after he was struggling, and the whole offense was struggling. But you also have execution problems, not by just Russ, but by receivers dropping the ball. Metcalf had drops. There were other players that were giving up on routes early and so forth. But too many times, Russell Wilson was playing outside of the construction of the offense.
Well, that's been Russell Wilson his whole career.
That has been Russell Wilson. He's very good at it, unstructured. Mm-hmm. But there are moments and times where you need to have him play within a structure in order to be able to be successful and convert third downs and so forth. And I think that's some of the issues is, for whatever reason, this team got off sync in how they were all working together.
Yeah, I'm.
And I, and some of that gets laid at the feet of Brian Schottenheimer, but a lot of it gets laid at the feet of Russell Wilson.
I think it's both, but I think you're setting Russell Wilson up to fail by asking him to run those plays over and over again against what other teams were doing.
I agree.
You're setting him up to fail. And I think that's what really gets
me. How
many
times did we come back on the show after losses and stuff, even after some wins that were close, we'd come back and say, what were they doing? Those plays are taking too long to develop. They're trying to take these deep shots when everything is open underneath. We should be taking what the defense gives you, move the ball incrementally down the field and score points. Instead, it just seemed like it was all discombobulated, for weeks on end. Like it never really got any better. Maybe the Jets game, and then it just reverted.
Yeah. And that's the Jets, right? I mean, right. They're just not a good team.
So let me ask you this. So let's talk a little bit about the season. What was good? What can we retain, and what was bad that we need to get rid of? Like, let's talk about a few players. Like, for example, unrestricted free agents. Chris Carson. What do you do with Chris Carson, Keith?
I think
he probably wants $7 million a year.
I wouldn't.
And he
no
was
running back.
4 games, and he was limited in the other 12 games he was in.
Yeah,
had 700 some odd yards.
This is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I think if that's what he's asking for and he thinks he's going to get that, let him walk.
He's a very effective runner. In fact, he's a runner that Seattle likes to have.
You're right that he does, but
and we have
running back
in the draft.
Running backs are they're not worth that much, because you saw what happened when he was out and Carlos Hyde played. The offense still worked. Like Carlos Hyde he didn't have a great year, but his yards, like his yards before contact was really poor because the offensive line they basically set him up poorly. His yards after contact per play was very solid. He played fine, and he was very good on third.
One of the biggest criteria in football is being available.
True, but
he wasn't enough.
Yeah, and neither was Chris Carson.
So therein lies some of the problem with the offense being kind of one-dimensional. And when you are one-dimensional, defenses have an easier time trying to figure you out and stopping you. So it kind of all goes together. So let me ask you this. Do you agree? So you agree that we need to run a little bit more and more effectively?
They need to run more effectively. They need that threat there.
And so let me ask you this. Up front, offensive line in the trenches. And then trenches is where we lost this last game, by the way. What's going on? We got Posix unrestricted, Apati's unrestricted. Are those two guys an area where the team looks to upgrade this season?
Definitely Lupati.
Or does Posick come back?
I think Posick probably comes back because he played pretty well. I mean, he's got some weaknesses, and we know that.
And he has a pretty deep injury history with the Seahawks.
True. I think he comes back mostly because I don't think it costs anything to bring him back. Lupati, 1, he rarely played. 2, when he played, he wasn't that good.
It's time to move on.
It was time to move on a year ago.
I agree.
I honestly think that they didn't need to bring him back.
I think they were going to depend on Phil Haynes to kind of come through, and Phil Haynes was injured all year. And now I don't know what to think about Phil Haynes because that's 2 years in a row where he's completely gave us nothing.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
All right. And then, okay, so some other key free agent guys, Jacob Hollister. Jacob Hollister, the year before last, played really well in 10, 11 games he played. He had 48 receptions, tons of yards, 4 touchdowns, something like that. This year was invisible. And when he was visible, he was dropping the balls and he was missing blocks. That's all I remember about his season this year. It was the worst season, and he had the worst game in the biggest game of the year against the Rams. And so I don't see how you keep Hollister.
Yeah, there's no reason to.
And you got Parkinson on the roster.
You got Parkinson on the roster. If you want a pass catching tight end who can't block, you've already got one. And Hollister did nothing this year to dictate that he needs to be on this roster. I thought Disley played really well in the role that he was in, which was mostly as a blocking tight end because they used him as a right tackle for a large chunk of the year. Olsen played pretty well, but I think he's headed to retirement and a job in a booth. But Hollister was very disappointing to me. And I, at this point, would be
the entire tight end room was underutilized this year. I thought for sure with Disley and Olsen, we were going to have a tandem. Things were going to open up in the middle. Release valve wise, Russell Wilson was going to have a couple of great targets there. And we ended up having 25 completions to each one of those guys for the entire year, which was, I think, totally undervalued. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what happened there because Brian Schottenheimer's always had a tight end, as an offensive coordinator that he's been able to throw to and stuff. I'm not exactly sure why they went away from that this year.
I don't know.
David Moore, Philip Dorsett. Understand they want Philip Dorsett to come back, but he didn't show anything. We have no idea what we've got in Philip Dorsett, if he'll even be the same. Pete
Carroll was really positive about that. Apparently he had a second surgery and feels really good now. They like what they see out of him. He was basically like, we're just counting this year as a lost year and they're going to bring him back. Because he was on a league minimum deal. So they'll bring him back on a league minimum deal again. And try again at it.
They could use a guy like Philip Dorsett. So if you're not going to have a big, tall, possession-style receiver that can play out of the slot to give Russell Wilson a target in the middle, a slasher guy, like a Julian Edelman kind of a guy, can give you 4 or 5 receptions from the slot. And he could fill that role.
Mm-hmm.
Or he could stretch your defense and have DK Metcalf play that big slot spot at certain times. David Moore. David Moore is an issue for me because he's an unrestricted free agent. He renegotiated his contract for a league veteran minimum deal after he signed a tender. And do you have David Moore back at all, or do you just move on and try to find something better? Freddie Swain's going to take those touches this year anyway, I would think.
What's he going to cost?
League minimum.
Because this year he wasn't on a league minimum. He went on more because of that restricted free agent status that he was on. But for next year,
yeah, but they renegotiated him before the season, Keith. He
true.
Made $890,000 instead of $2.1 million.
Yeah. Okay. I was just thinking more like he could have I think he could have made in the low sevens, but he was close. But yeah, you bring him back on a league minimum. Why not? It's non-guaranteed. What do you lose? He either comes out and makes the roster and shows that he deserves playing time, or you cut him at the end of training camp.
I was a little concerned. I'll be completely honest, and I'll disagree with you a little bit. I thought that David Moore this year had his feet in quicksand and was very undecisive returning the ball, lost his job. When he did catch the ball in open space, he was frozen sometimes and very ineffective in picking up yards after catch. And I just don't, and they tried to use him in that role. And I just don't see him being a dynamic run after catch type player. And I think we can do better than that. That's me.
No, you're right. We can do better than that. But what do you lose by
potentially giving up a roster spot if he has a good training camp to a more promising prospect with more upside, but unproven?
I don't know.
That happens.
League minimum deal with no guarantees. Bring him in. If Philip Dorsett gets hurt again or can't go, then you've got a guy that you can depend on.
The one thing I do agree on, and we'll have to talk about this the entire offseason, is the salary cap and the number of players that we'll need to sign into that, and the number of unrestricted guys we have now. The big decisions are going to have to be made. And so a guy like David Moore might be the most reasonable opportunity to get somebody competent in to play for you in that role without costing a ton of money. Cedric Abuahe, I thought he played poorly in his first game subbing, but then came on and played average.
Yeah.
And maybe that's good enough to stick around. I don't know. He played in favor over like a guy like Chad Wheeler that was on the practice squad quite a bit. So, a guy like Abuahe who could play both interior guard position and tackle for you on either side is a valuable guy. I just don't know if it's going to be him or somebody else like him next year.
Yeah. And he's a valuable guy. I mean, any swing tackle is a valuable guy. And I thought he played okay at times. He played bad at times. He played pretty well at times. He's what you kind of expect from a backup tackle who's a swing tackle who can play both sides. I don't have any problem with him. I'm not going to pay him a lot of money. But the Seahawks didn't pay him a lot of money this year. So, yeah, go ahead. You need a backup tackle? You can do worse.
How about Geno Smith? Is this the year, given the situation that we just kind of went through, where the Seahawks take a longer look at evaluating and developing a quarterback?
I think yes. And the reason why I say that is because Alex Pagoo is back on the roster.
And they like Danny Etling.
And they really liked him as a rookie. He decided not to sign that futures contract and stick around and instead see if he could, find someplace closer to home and all of that kind of stuff. But now he's back. And they really liked him, and they like what he can do.
What Keith means is they signed him to a futures contract for next year.
He's on the roster for next year, or he's on the roster when the rosters expand to 90 from 53 to 90 as of the first day of next league year, which is typically the first weekend in March. At that moment, he's on the roster. And I think that you don't jettison a guy that you've had around all season like Etling and bring back a guy like Magoo if you don't really like him. And I think they really like him. And I think given the salary cap concerns that they have, that Geno Smith is probably not going to get paid in Seattle. If he wants to come back on a near minimum deal, sure, bring him back. Why not? I mean, you want to win. He's a good backup. I mean, you can do far worse. But if he wants to get paid like a good backup, which he probably should, which is $2.5 to $5 million a year, go ahead and take a swing at not paying him. And
So let's look at the defensive side of the ball. KJ Wright played himself back into a contract, at least a contract conversation this season by having one of his best seasons in the last 5 years. And he switched positions to do it. Moved from weak side to strong side so that they had a spot for Jordan Brooks. What do you think of KJ Wright?
Again, it comes down to cost. He had a great year. He really did. And once he moved to the strong side, where what they were asking him to do fit his physical talents that he has at this point in his career with a little bit of age and injury history underneath him, he was just able to play and be good. And it opened up Brooks to play in his natural position. And the combination of the three of them was outstanding. I wouldn't have any problem with it. He showed that he, can still play at a high level. He showed durability, which he hasn't showed in the previous couple of years. And why wouldn't you? But if he wants $10 million a year, you move on.
Diminishing return at some point in KJ Wright's career, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, you do. That's what I mean. Like, if he wants $10 million a year, no, sorry, go get that from someone else, and we'll play a rookie or Cody Barton or whatnot, or just play the nickel more often and play two linebackers most of the time. I'm okay with that too. But if he wants 6, 5, yeah, do it. Bring him in, play him, go for it.
Out of the next 3 players, who would you retain? Bruce Irvin, Benson Mayowa, or Quentin Dunbar?
That is an interesting question. Benson Mayowa played really well when they got him into the right role.
Yes.
When they were asking him to be a starter, he was genuinely inept.
Down. Yeah.
When they asked him to come in and play
25% of the snaps.
I would say 18 snaps a game as a dedicated pass rusher and nothing else. He was really effective, and that's a valuable part of the roster. So I'm
especially
tempted,
when you have 2 young guys that are going to be in front of him, and Terrell Taylor and Robinson.
Yeah, but you can also work some stuff with the other side of the line. You know what I mean? Like when you go to a NASCAR package so that he is on there, Robinson is, on the other side of the line and that kind of situation. And move Green or maybe move Green and Robinson to the inside and play Taylor and Mayowa on the outside and go with a NASCAR package on, 3rd and a mile and that kind of situation. You can do those kind of things, but honestly, like, Bruce Irvin is a hard one for me because he never really got a chance to show. He's going to play for very little next year. Especially if KJ Wright does leave, then you bring him in to be, at least you have something at strong side linebacker that you can kind of depend on, at least in the beginning until any of the rookies or people.
You can't pay him $5.5, $6 million.
You're paying him
He needs a little bit more than league minimum. Maybe.
He needs to be making like 1.5.
I agree.
So sorry.
And then Quentin Dunbar. What do you think? He had a tough run with the Seahawks. It was tough. It was a tough year for Dunbar in general, with the off
was
the
not a
field
good
stuff,
year.
and then this year, and then the injury, horrible play on the field. It just didn't work out for him here. But
No,
does
and
that mean he's precluded from coming back?
No, it doesn't, because he did have all that stuff that was going on, and trying to deal with that kind of stuff. But
and the Seahawks have an interesting situation contract-wise with Shaquille Griffin. He's an unrestricted free agent.
Yep.
And it's a, here's the situation with Griffin too. He's an league average cornerback who has a little bit of injury tendency, who may want more money than the Seahawks are willing to pay. And so does a guy like Dunbar give you a little bit of insurance on that?
I think he's better than a league average quarterback.
He's not top 10.
No.
So if he's top 15, top 30, he's league average.
Yeah, if he's, top 30, and I think he's probably somewhere in the 20 to 22 range. I mean, you see, there are stretches where he just is a dominant player,
and there are also stretches where he gets beat over the top
where he struggles. Yeah, right. And so you kind of have to take some of that as you go, and that kind of stuff. So
I think he's dependent. Just like the Legion of Boom guys were all dependent on each other to be good, especially Earl Thomas. I think Shaquille Griffin is dependent on his free safety to be playing very well. When Quandre Diggs plays well, Shaquille Griffin plays well, and that's no surprise. Especially the zone heavy coverages that the Seahawks play.
Yeah.
But when you play zone as a defense, is Shaquille Griffin worth top 22 money? I don't think so.
I wouldn't. And that's again going to be an unpopular opinion. I
not necessarily. I think people get that.
I think that corner. We saw this year that you have to have corners in this defense.
Yeah.
Right. And you have to have good corner play, but you don't have to have great corner play. I mean, the defense works great if you've got peak Richard Sherman out there, but it's not required for this defense to work, because they didn't have elite all pro level corner play on on the defense this year. And the defense still worked the last 8 games. Like, it worked really well.
So the defense, so if we can carry the defense over to next year at the same kind of level they finished with, and the only people on the list that are worth losing potentially are Wright, Mayowa, and Griffin. And if we lose all 3, that still doesn't kill your defense, because you're going to get adequate replacement value players in those positions, to me. I think the defense can be okay. Yeah, I'm a little worried about the offense a little bit. I think that, we need to find a running back. We need to find a couple of offensive linemen. We need to find a third tight end or number 2 tight end. I think everything else is pretty straight. We've got our top 2 wide receivers. Lockett's going to be on a contract year, right? And we're going to have to figure out like a third wide receiver, but that's pretty easy to do. So, and then I wanted to talk to you too about the salary cap just for a minute, where we're kind of at. Over the cap says we've got the league cap is going to be set. They're figuring the league cap is going to be set at $78 million. It was earlier reported 75. They're thinking 78. We'd talked a little bit maybe that the cap would be leveraged over a number of years so that they could maintain the level of the cap as it exists now, possibly, and push it forward, 3 or 4 years, so that And when they get the new TV contract, they would just not increase the cap for the first couple of years and then allow it to go up from there. So that way, players are not impacted this year's, and team level is not impacted this year's as far as quality of play and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, this will take because it's not what the CBA says, because the CBA was like the cap is dependent on
addendum.
is dependent on the previous year, but that doesn't have them, basically kind of taking losses because of all of the COVID related stuff. And for them you can either decrease the cap and have everyone who's a free agent this year struggling to get paid at all, or you can keep the cap where it is and spread that hit out over a few years and just keep it and just level rather than having it dip back down and then come back up. So there'll be an addendum. They'll figure out all the details. That's why no one can come out and say the details. But we have heard from people that are within the union and from people that are within the league office that's the plan, is to spread it out.
Both sides to do something about
Absolutely. Nobody wants this.
Right. So 178, but let's just take 178 just for the topic of their 180, whatever. The Seahawks have, so at 178, the Seahawks have $17.8 million, something like that, available in true cap number. And so, but the Seahawks have some opportunity to generate more cap. They have a number of different contracts, big contracts that are unguaranteed this year. I just want to list those out for you, and then I'm going to let you talk about maybe what they could do to help manipulate that. So Adams, 9.86 non-guaranteed. Diggs, 5.5. Dunlap, 14.1. Dwayne Brown, only 2 million of his 13.55 is guaranteed, so he's 11.55. So there's $45 million right there, unguaranteed salaries. It's just some players that we want back. I mean, there's not one of those players that I would want to leave. So what can the Seahawks do to get money out of those and also maybe secure these guys into the future?
Well, I mean, the easiest one is Carlos Dunlap, because he's set to make 14.1 next year, and if he gets released and is out on the open market, he won't get that. Not at his age.
But he could get 10.
He could get 10. You know what? We want to make sure that you get that 14. So we're going to cut your salary this year to 9. And next year, we'll make it 8 over 2 years. So that's a total of 17, and we're going to guarantee 14 of it. So you'll still get the same.
So what's his first year cap hit then?
So depending on how much of it is salary or is signing bonus when they do that, because by stretching it out over a couple of years, you can take, first of all, you decrease the salary from 14 to 9, and then you'd say half of that is a signing bonus. So therefore you'd cut another, let's do it this way. Let's say $6 million of that 9 is a signing bonus. You cut another 3. His cap number becomes 6. So it goes from 14.1 to 6 next year. And he ends up with just as much money guaranteed.
That's a savings of $8 million against the cap for the Seahawks.
Yeah, and you get him
locked in for 2
years.
And happy.
Yes.
Potentially. So, and you can do the same thing with all those guys, correct?
Kind of. The problem with you can't do the same thing with Jamal Adams, because he's a guy who, the reason why he's in Seattle was because he wanted the Jets to pay him and they didn't want to pay him.
So by saving money on Dunlap, though, you've generated money for Adams.
Yeah. And so what the Seahawks could do is sign Adams to an extension that pays him whatever they need to pay him, 14, 15, 16 million a year. But those numbers start after the conclusion of his current deal, so that his salary next year doesn't change.
In fact, you could convert some of it to bonus.
You could convert some of it to bonus, and push more of it out. But I think at some point if his salary is going to go from 9 to 15 the following year, are you really going to be able to work around if it goes from 6 to 18? that year, or 6 to 17. You know what I mean? Like there's advantages to having it now, but there's also advantages of using some of the cap space now rather than just kicking the can down the street and always having, cap concerns. So I think with him, there's a little bit less. Same with Diggs, because his number is so low already. It's in the fives. I don't think that you're going to see him like rework. And I mean, they might do it and get Adam a year or two in order to get his number down from the fives down into like the threes.
The only reason I included it is because there is just a little bit of money there to be able to work with. What I'm trying to say is you can generate some significant savings to increase your cap savings in the next year from 17 to say 30. I think that's an opportunity that the Seahawks have.
And you can do that without losing the players, without just jettisoning, because they're all key players, right? You're talking about your two Pro Bowl safeties, your left tackle, right? So these are guys you don't want to replace, because if you let them go, you have to bring someone in to replace them. And can you bring someone in that's an equal talent for less money?
And we also have 24 unrestricted free agents that we need to replace on the roster. Now, some of those guys obviously are coming back, but they're not accounted for yet under that cap.
Yeah.
So you don't want to, and we only have 4 draft picks. So this is going to be a very interesting offseason, which is some of our favorite time of the year together on the show, because we need to figure out this puzzle, and it's a fairly complicated puzzle without a first round draft pick, a second, 4th, 5th, I think 7th, something like that, right? And so it'll be interesting to see how it all fits. We don't have huge glaring holes that we're trying to fill. Obviously, the cornerback spot, we need to kind of figure that out. The strong linebacker spot, a tight end, and a running back, and everything else is fairly starter-wise is pretty good.
Yeah. And I think you just do in a situation where, do they need to generate some cap? Yeah, they do. And they will. Like I said, Dunlap's the easiest one. You could generate $8 million fairly quickly, and you lock him up for an extra year. And that $8 million, I mean, you're talking about those 24 unrestricted free agents that they've got to re-sign. A lot of them will be signing for league minimum deals that they'll be guys that are being replaced. And so, you're talking about that $8 million might bring in 15 of them. And so that could be a huge chunk of fixing what you want to, the roster and everything. So I just think you're going to be able to do some of that stuff. I'm not, you're going to say you just throw the cap to the wind and don't do, and who cares? But at the same time, I'm not one to overly get freaked out about cap status, because I know there's always ways for you to work it, massage it, and do stuff with it. Things are never as bad as people want you to believe.
That's true. All right. So we've got quite a few shows planned out into the future. I think next year we're going to continue the kind of the conversation that we had, only we're going to talk about the guys that are under contract. The roster, we're going to do a roster evaluation show. Who's on the roster? What position groups are looking good? What position groups are needing improvement? Additional players, signings, free agents, draft picks, all that kind of stuff. What we're trying to do is establish need amongst all the position groups on the team, so that every episode after that, all the way through the draft, kind of gets us to additions onto the team to make us better and complete the roster. And then the episode after that, we're doing a GM coaches evaluation show. So we're going to go through the coaches and general manager, and we're just going to kind of look at them performance wise. We had that conversation today a little bit, but we'll go more into depth.
For that show, we are going to have a special guest, Dana Gorman from I was going to say NFL Female, but that's their old name. It's now Our Turf Football. Is going to be here, in part because otherwise the whole show will be me ranting about Shoddy, and you guys just heard a show of me ranting about Shoddy, and you probably don't want to hear another one. So we're going to get in another opinion where we can go through and
I'd love to spend as much time that we did on Shoddy today on Ken Norton in that show, just because I think I want to understand better. Maybe we will by then. What happened in the first 8 weeks? I want to kind of see if he comes out with a news conference. We have more to talk about. Maybe they make a couple other personnel moves as far as the coaching staff. By then we'll have more to talk about. And then after that, we start getting into evaluating some college players, some college all-star games, Senior Bowl. We'll take a look at the initial free agency, see what's out there available for the Seahawks to look at, to acquire, and then we'll start doing some position group evaluations for the draft. We'll do the combine show all the way up to the draft, have a draft show, and then a post-draft evaluation show of our picks. And so we're here every week. We don't take any time off, and those are some of the funnest shows of the year. We don't have to stress out about games. We just come in and we talk about prospects and team position group evaluations and stuff. It's pretty fun. So Keith, have we cathartically gotten you over this hump on the way that the season ended, or do you still need some processing time?
Does processing time involve adult beverages?
Yeah, absolutely.
Then yes, I need some processing time.
Yeah, go put back a few. Have a great weekend. No football.
Oh yeah.
Take a football weekend off. You don't have to watch anything else. I did. I'm one of those guys where when the Seahawks are done, I'm kind of leave it. I walk away and I don't really pay too much attention. I kind of start to focus on the college stuff more and get in tune with who's out there, who's available, all that kind of stuff. So I kind of walk away. I think it's good for me at least at this point in my life. I realize, it's just not as important as it used to be. The Seahawks stuff, yeah, but everything else, it's just noise.
Yeah. I mean, I like to watch the NFL. I mean, I don't just watch the Seahawks games. I watch whoever's on. So sure. I'll watch the playoffs and everything going forward. But a lot of it it's on while I'm working or doing other things. Like I'll have the games on and I'll watch them. But yeah, it's not the same. I mean, when the Seahawks are on, like that's where my attention is. That's where my focus is. I mean, I'm into the game and doing all of that. So, but yeah, it is going to be, we're into the off season now. We're done with 2020, and
we're entering our 5th year on the air together.
That is kind of crazy, to be honest. In that it does not feel like we've been doing this for that long.
We'll have completed our 4th year. Well, this is our 207th episode. Technically 208 would have been the completion of 4 years, but we did a few extra shows this summer during COVID, so we would have something to do. But in, I think, mid-February is when we started.
Yep. And so, yeah, it's been we're almost done with year 4, and it's been a lot of fun, and I wouldn't stop doing this for any reason whatsoever. And yeah, I mean, it's just, it also doesn't feel like we've been doing this forever. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't feel like, oh, we've been doing this for a long time, and whatever, because there's no drudgery to it at all. It's just get together, talk football with a friend, and
yeah, likewise,
and love it. So
awesome. All right, let's get out of here. We put the season to bed. Next week, it's a brand new football year for us, and we'll get started with some good roster evaluation stuff, and hopefully turn this into a positive.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.